Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Cucretti. I am a managing director of insights and innovation here at Olson Zaltman. And I'm so happy that everybody joined us here to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the unconscious mind. We have a lot of really great insights, unconscious insights, that we're going to be talking about today and walking through metaphors, the emotional impact of this, and how it's starting to change and shapes attitudes and behaviors of both Gen Z and boomers. A couple of things before we jump into these insights is we have a chat window open. I see somebody's already using it. Thank you. Where we would really love your participation to ask us questions. And we have ample time for Q&A at the end. So if you're thinking about how you could apply these insights, or if you have a foundation you're working with, please, feel free to use the chat button and we will start and answer questions at the end of this. So let's jump in because I do want to have a lot of time to do some Q&A. I want to start by talking about this brilliant quote by George Lakoff, who is one of our inspirations here at Olson Zaltman because he is, does so much work in metaphor as well. And I just want everyone to take a minute to quickly read this, where he said, metaphor plays a role in the creation of our reality. And when our reality is a grim reality, like it is feeling today, right, with COVID-19, he says it becomes all the more important to understand the reasoning that helped create this. So what we're going to do is start to look at what are the metaphors that people are using to describe COVID, to talk about how it's impacting and affecting their lives. And then we can start seeing and empathizing with what does that mean to them, right? How do they personally see it for Gen Z and boomers? Okay, let's dig in. One of the key questions here is someone asked me is, why would we want to study the unconscious mind during a global pandemic? And it's very complex, but also a very easy answer for us. Because right now, these are very unprecedented times. We are facing this health crisis that none of us have ever experienced before. And a lot of people are understanding more system two ways of thinking, which is answering questions on a scale, or how do you think this, impacts your life on, rating it 1 to 5, or how do you think this is going to change your behavior? We asked some of those questions as well. We're going to take a look at that, but we've also taken a look at how this is impacting the system one mind. That is the unconscious mind. No one else is really doing this today, but it's so important because what we're seeing is that our rational brain, right, is kind of, going out there and buying a lot of toilet paper and paper towels, right? But what we're not really great at in terms of understanding our unconscious mind, this is our specialty. And we applied our methodology and our metaphoric thinking to understanding why people are doing what they're doing, right? And what are the behaviors at play? And we believe this is very pressing research today. We're going to be doing this research and having another webinar in a few short weeks to see how the metaphors that people are using are changing. So why metaphor? I want to spend just a couple of minutes on this slide so everyone here on the call, we can all root ourselves and ground ourselves in the importance of understanding why metaphors are critical to understand. Metaphors are in part how we understand the world around us. It's how we can understand very complex ideas as well. And I don't know if there's anything more complex today than a global pandemic, right? Because what we do is we apply our understanding of one thing to something else, right? That is essentially a metaphor. And metaphors reveal up to 95% of all of our unconsciousness, which is 95% of our thoughts, decision making. And metaphors also make communication easier. And this is so important for all of us, is because once we can activate those metaphors, right, that are sitting in that 95% of our unconscious mind, is that then we can make behavior change easy for people, right? If we want to talk about social distancing, right, we have to use the metaphors that will resonate with people, right? Because they can act on the behaviors, because it makes sense to them and it's incredibly intuitive. So, what you see here in this framework, this triangle framework, is we looked at the surface metaphors that people use, and then we're going to talk about the method in a minute. But people, all of us, use 5 to 6 metaphors, spoken metaphors per minute of conversation in all languages. This is global that we all do this. And screen here. Hold on one second. Okay, perfect. So then after that, there are strategic metaphors that sit in the middle of all of this. And these are the themes of the metaphors. So when we start talking about how Gen Z use force and violent metaphors, we can actually start looking at the thematic expressions of those that force language. And then finally, and most importantly, at the foundation of all of this metaphoric thinking are deep metaphors. These start developing for us at birth. They are universal and they are global, and they're few in number. So a lot of us around the world, and I can see that we have some um, people joining us from Canada, your deep metaphors are the same as mine, as they are someone in France, as they are someone in India. They unite us, and they're, like I said, they're very few and far in number, but they are universal. We're going to start talking about those in just a minute because we structure our insights around these. And these are at the heart of strategic communication principles and guidelines. Perfect. Okay, so now let's jump forward to some objectives, because these are also incredibly important to understand of how do we collect this data, because we really can't understand the impact of the data and these insights have without understanding how we got to them, right? So very quickly, our objectives here were to create a report that was useful from everyone all over the world, people joining us from Italy. It's so nice that you joined us. How could you enact on these metaphors as well? And then what we also want to do is understand some segment differences. We've been reading a lot, especially here in the United States, some different behaviors that are coming out of Gen Z and boomers, and we wanted to understand what was going on and why. And then finally, we wanted to understand the imagery and the language so we could make recommendations to the research community of how we can help. All right. How we collected the data was via Simile. It is a new proprietary tool where what we do is we quantitatively look at metaphors, and we can elicit metaphors at scale. So what we did is we have a whole survey platform that's built on Qualtrics, and you guys are free. Everyone on the call is free to go to Project Simile and take a peek at this so you can experience it. But we ask people to reflect on their thoughts and feelings about how COVID-19 is impacting their lives. That was our research question. Then what they do is then the participants go and they select images that reflected their sentiments. We have an image database that we have been working on for about 2 years now. And that image database is very carefully curated and selected by us so that it has the most metaphoric way that people can choose. Images are equally distributed amongst all of our deep metaphors. And we're going to talk in just a minute about the metaphors that in the images that people chose as it relates to COVID-19. Then what we do is our data is analyzed by highly trained ZMET analysts here at Olson Saltman. We manually analyze, tag, and annotate for metaphor in the language and the images. Very quickly, you can see we had an equally distributed sample between boomers and Gen Z, and then also that's equally distributed for gender as well. So here's where we're at today. What are we seeing in the headlines? And here's what the headlines are telling us. What we found when we did a quick content analysis is that there were these generational perceptions, right? And attitudes that are existing in the headlines where people are thinking, right, that why, and the questions exist that why don't boomers care more about the coronavirus, right? Because there's a bunch of survey data that's saying that they're the most, they're going out in public, especially I read a lot this weekend here because it was Easter in the United States and boomers hosting Easter celebrations where that seems quite irrational because they are at the greatest likelihood to contract COVID-19, right? And so, and it was also that how can we get them to take it seriously? And also, I like this headline where somebody said Gen Z gets an F, a letter grade, right, in grasping the severity of the coronavirus, or wondering why aren't they worried about it, right? For this. We also, in the headline, see a lot of mixed metaphors and frames. And I just want everybody to take a look at all of the mixed metaphors that we see here. Some people in the news media call it a terror and use the metaphor in the frame of a terror. Another person said war. We're also seeing it talked about as like a natural forest fire, right? And how we can control the burn. Another person, had written about it like a whack-a-mole. Some news media is talking about it, right, as a climate change, okay? And then finally, we're also seeing a lot of content around about it being, fueling by capitalism, that it's a crisis. So there's a lot of different frames, right, that are out there that people are writing about and not really rallying around one, or even more importantly, what's the best frame that's going to resonate to change behavior with boomers and with Gen Z. So we learned, and we actually believe we shattered a little bit of myth, right, when we look at those headlines, because we saw that concern is evident, right? People are extremely or very concerned. Gen Z and boomers are. Their primary concern is interesting, though, when we look at the data that we collected, is their primary concern is their health of their family or friends, right? Primarily. And then you can also see their personal health, especially for Gen Z, not surprisingly, is their last of their concern. But there is a concern there, right? Based on this data that we collected, it seems like they grasp that severity of COVID-19. Thank you guys for all of these questions. I can't wait till we get to our Q&A. But before we do that, so one of the questions that a professor that I read a brilliant piece of writing that she had done, I'm going to quote her in just a bit, but she asked, why aren't boomers heeding the warnings, right? Despite the evidence that they're at the highest risk. And then why is Gen Z, right, and the youthfulness of Gen Z sort of have this perception that they're invincible? So our primary research question is what do they think and feel about COVID-19? And then does their framing encourage their irrational, unconscious behavior? And we have some data and some reason to believe that, yes, it is right now. So let's move forward and let's see here. Let's dig deep in now the metaphors. And here's what we know today. This is our deep metaphor measurement slide, and this is going to be so important now because this study right here acts as our benchmark. We're going to be frequently doing new studies to see how these metaphors change over time, if they do change. So what we're going to be looking at is these deep metaphors. And a deep metaphor, like I said earlier, is that underlying metaphor that people use, all of us, everyone here on the phone included, use to express our thoughts and feelings, right? Like I said, they are very few in number. They are universal, right? And how they express themselves could be very different across populations, okay? So how someone in Generation Z talks about journey or force probably and could be different than how boomers are. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But I do want to draw our attention to our top 3 metaphors here because this is what we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about. We see that Gen Z and boomers do have connection as a deep metaphor in common. What we're going to do is take a look and take a look at that metaphor, what it means in just a few slides, and then what is the impact of COVID-19 to the feeling that they have and want of connection. Then we're also going to look at the deep metaphor of journey and force, because you guys can see here that journey for Gen Z is at 12% and several points higher as boomers. And then we see the opposite with force. We have hypotheses of what's going inside the unconscious minds of these two audiences. Okay, let's move forward. And I want to talk about connection and really start grounding ourselves in here, because this is, if we want to communicate to both Gen Z and boomers, right? If we want to start uniting these two audiences together, what our data suggests and tells us that there's only one metaphor to do that, and that's through the metaphor of connection. Specifically, this is actually about disconnection, right? Because they are united by this feeling and very real sense of disconnection. They have an acute sense of being disconnected from others. And what we're seeing in our data when we did our thematic analysis is that it's manifesting itself in two very different and distinct ways. They feel like they're being deprived of others. And you can see here, this is one image in our database that a respondent chose. And someone from Gen Z said that I can't be around those I love. I feel lonely and scared for my family. I miss spending time with them. Someone from our boomer segment said, we can't touch our loved ones. Even the metaphor of touch, right, is so powerful. And they said, I miss the hugs and kisses from my family and my friends. I miss spending special times together, right? So there's this acute feeling of physically missing the people. And then also the idea of being physically confined and trapped as well. There's also an emotional confinement as well when we look at their language. Someone from Gen Z used the metaphor, I feel trapped like a rat, right? I'm not doing anything, not going to work, can't visit your family and friends. I can't party as hard as I used to, right? And this is kind of what we're seeing in the headlines too, right? That they're valuing that those big social gatherings more than perhaps flattening the curve. And a boomer also said, right, it leads to anxiety, that emotional impact that we talked about again, right? Because if you're too close to people, separation from people is a constant stressor. And again, we're seeing a lot of pictures as well of physically feeling like you're confined or in jail. Okay. So again, we're going to talk about this and our implications in just a little bit, but I do want everyone on the call to understand that if we want to unite the audiences here and talk to them both, this is the metaphor to do these. So now let's first talk about boomers specifically. If we want to communicate and have relevant communication that's going to make boomers notice, pay attention, right? And then change their behavior, this is what we know. And I want to just quote Megan Gerhardt. She's been doing phenomenal writing around COVID-19. And she had said that, that there's another stage of life and a dynamic going on with boomers as a generation. She had, and she believes, and it's so interesting that what's happening is they're lengthening our lifespans. We are all living longer, right? And so now we have this period in our lives that we're calling active retirement. People are no longer retiring and staying at home and almost waiting to die, that people are having these really rich, fulfilling parts of their lives after retirement, right? Even those youngest boomers, right, who are at the 60-year threshold, they're even now with COVID-19 are at higher risk for the complications of it. And many of us, because of active retirement and because we are living longer, she said, we don't look, feel, or act old. So what she believes and hypothesizes is that what's happening is that the warnings that are coming out here for boomers and for elderly populations, they're not connecting because they don't see themselves as older or a boomer or even elderly. So what we see is very like they're, because of who they are and how their unconscious mind is reading these messages, they don't see that it's for them. Now, when we queried them in Simile, Um, their second most prominent metaphor was one of journey. What is a journey and why does it exist? And what makes us different, right, from all other animal species, we as humans, is we have an awareness of time. And that's what distinguishes us. Because what we do is we don't just rely on our instinct, we apply our past experiences to thinking about our future experiences and our current experiences, right? And this is how this innate, almost embodied cognition, deep metaphor arises. How it's expressed in us is very interesting. So, in our image database, we have lots of different images of journey. We have journeys that are, straight, easy journeys. We have journeys like the one you see here, which is someone chose this out of a curated image database, which is, multiple points in this journey, these swirling roads as well, definitely not clear cut. And what we do is we also look for languages around paths, forks in the road, climbing, broadening your horizon. If you get stuck on your journey, you can become stalled in a rut, the idea of keep going. All of this language is important for us to identify what is the deepest metaphor. Then what we see here are the strategic metaphors. If you can remember that triangle framework that I showed just a few minutes ago, this is what sits at the center of it. So what we found is that boomers have two frames for the COVID-19 journey. We found that they are biding their time, right? We look at the language. They talk about we have a long road to recovery. Again, that's a journey, right? They're being kept away from others. That's the disconnection we talked about. Another person says it will be a long road back to life as we knew it. Another says we're at a standstill, right? We have to move forward. Again, you can see all this journey language until the virus has passed us by. And then, or another person says, my whole life seems put in hibernation. That's an incredibly rich metaphor. So when we start looking at this, it feels like there's a positivity, there's an optimism here. And we also, that idea of this thematic expression, the strategic expression, is when we also look at the other images, these sun-soaked images. A lot of boomers talked about this light at the end of the tunnel. They said right here, you're looking up, you see the light, and it gives me hope. Another says there's storm clouds around, right? But here is the hope, and our country is going to come out better and stronger. Another person said times are dark, but there's again a light at the end of the tunnel. Our data was filled with this sense of light in the tunnel. And so they see this, right, as a journey, but then ultimately they're incredibly optimistic about it. And our hypothesis right now, and we believe, is this could be why we're seeing their behaviors the way that they are. Because if you're optimistic, right, and you're hopeful, does that maybe change how you think about social distancing, right? Change your behavior? Probably, right? So now let's take a look at the impacts quickly now on COVID-19 to Gen Z. And I want to go back to Dr. Gerhardt's her belief of what's happening with Gen Z. And this is fascinating because she said that on the other age of the age spectrum here is Gen Z, right? That they have been defying the social distancing rules even more than boomers. She had said that it makes sense because this is a generation that has experienced scandal or crisis in the headlines, in the news, almost every day of her lives, right? She's hypothesized and believes that this could be leading them to selectively filter out these warnings, right? Because they could be a little bit desensitized to this, right? And also, they have a lot of value on face-to-face connection, which could be fueling their needs of not socially distancing, right? Which we see that in their biggest, most prominent need and metaphor is connection, right? But interestingly, their second most prominent metaphor, deep metaphor, is force. Now, this is imagery that a Gen Z chose, this image of a tornado. What is force and why does it exist? This manifests and develops again very early in our lives, like all deep universal metaphors do. And force manifests itself as a power. It's a source of energy. It's something we feel as a physical impact to us. So this construct or philosophy is really all about causation, right? That something is going to impact us in some way. This could be a social interaction, arguments can be force, or even moral deliberations can be a force. Things like I'm banging my head against a wall is how we express this as well. Or feeling like I'm under attack, if someone's debating me at work, okay? Or wow, I feel like the world is on fire today. These are all ways that we embody and then subsequently express force. Gen Z is very different from boomers in this sense. And here we found they have three kind of thematic metaphors. Theirs are all around conflict framing in this force. So here you can see some of the imagery that they selected and some very powerful quotes. One Gen Z had said, I feel like this virus is taking my life and flipping it upside down. Another had said, this virus has affected my life as much as if someone ran up to me and stabbed me, physically changing it forever. Okay, so that what they're feeling is literally they're physically being threatened, physically being turned upside down or stabbed. Some people in Generation Z, they also talk about it like a war. They talk about it like the panic, right? And brought and chose this picture of this war scene and said that what's taking place is similar to during a war. People feel like this pandemic is the form of a war. Another person has said that the worst has not yet to hit us, and when it does, it will be chaos. Differently than physical force or a war, someone else from Generation Z said the storm is threatening us, and we see a lot of natural disaster forces as well. Here, a person brought in a picture of a hurricane and said the world is going down the drain. And we are like the tornado, if you guys can remember on the very first slide of this report. And this is why we chose the image of the tornado, because this person from Gen Z said that the more of us that catch COVID-19 or coronavirus, the more of the world that's going to be destroyed. Another person said that the huge storms will impact our lives because storms destroy, and that's exactly what's happening now with COVID-19. So while these thematic expressions are varied and very different, the underlying deeper story that Gen Z is telling us is that they feel, right, there's a lot of fear here, and there is definitely a physical force. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues who wrote this report, and they're going to talk about now what we can do with these insights for the future for boomers and Gen Z. Malcolm Hannibal?
Hi, yes, thanks so much. Hopefully, the rest of you have gotten a lot of the insights you shared. They're very powerful at this point. And now we're going to talk a little bit about how you can actually leverage them. So, as you've heard, at a subconscious level, a very different landscape is forming. And here in the physical world, we're really already adapting to this new reality. Since this pandemic was declared in mid-March, 92% of companies now have adjusted their creative. And that's mostly to say, we're here for you, to decrease the price messaging, to act more empathetic. And one of the most compelling stats that I've read recently is that people are literally smiling 32% less now in response to ads. So the challenge is real, but by understanding the frameworks that we've been discussing, so are the opportunities. So on this slide here, let's get back to Gen Z. You can refer to the image on the left. You can refer to the quotes and images slide back when you're looking at force. And it's apparent that they view this as a catastrophic event that's happening to them. So one of our first recommendations is to flip that attitude on its head and acknowledge, yes, this is an aggressive force, but you have the power to fight back. And in a real natural disaster, this can take many forms. So you may not be fighting per se, but you can be a first responder metaphor. metaphor. Can everyone hear me? Okay, just taking a quick break. Let me adjust my audio.
Oh, that's much better.
Okay, is that better?
That is better.
Perfect.
A lot of people are typing. All right. A little still
Still
distorted. Let's see. Okay. People can hear me. Do you want to, Hannibal Malcolm, give us an audio check really quick?
perfect. Yes, I'm gonna try and continue. Is it any better here? Okay, great. So I'm just gonna start from the beginning of this again, and not focus. I just start from our first point again. So when I was talking about what we can do with this for the future, at a subconscious level, we're experiencing a very different world now. So at this point already, from our research, we found that 92% of companies are adjusting their creative. And a lot of that is to deliver messaging that's a lot more empathetic in its style. Saying things like, we're here for you. But research from another firm has found that people are actually smiling 32% less now in response to ads. And that's a stat I thought was worth mentioning because it demonstrates that these metaphors and its fear is having a very tangible impact even on people's physical expression. So by mastering the metaphors that we've been discussing, we're taking on a real challenge and it creates a real opportunity. All right. Am I still coming through okay? Sounds like a little bit of a challenge. Can you hear me now? Okay. Well, yes.
Yes. Okay, a bunch of people are typing. Thank you, everyone, for your responses.
Okay.
Ooh,
Perfect.
Michael has a good comment. Okay.
I'm going to try a different audio system very briefly.
Okay. Okay, perfect. In the meantime, I'm going to take back over really quick until we can, Hannibal and Malcolm, we figure this out. So let's talk about some implications because they were just giving some great background. So when we think about and how we structured these two sets of implications, right, is that there's some social policy and behavioral change implications. And then how can anyone who's in the research and insights community and brand communications can support this? So very first is what we see is that we can challenge some apathy, right, by perhaps reverse engineering the force paradigm for Gen Z, right? How can we think about fighting back against the threat? And then also, we do know that they have this big need, right? Their most prominent deep metaphor, universal metaphor here is connection. So, how can we leverage the fact that they want to feel connected, right? By making this cause a rallying point for them. We know that Gen Z, they're online, right? And that they are incredibly inspired by large social movements. So, what can we do about this? And how can we leverage that within the universal metaphors? And then finally, for social policy, is how can we acknowledge and really present the stress that they're feeling and showing the progress, right, in spite of this, because it could build trust for them and help with their sense of optimism. And now finally, brands. What we know and what we believe is portraying COVID-19, right, as an enemy that we can successfully challenge and defeat it, right? So what we wouldn't want to recommend is, and if your brand can help, help help do this, right? If it's a brand that has a forceful element to it as well. Maybe it has ingredients or certain things in it that amplifying that in your communications as well would resonate with Gen Z, especially if you're doing any COVID-19 branding. Then also using content, right? Featuring moments of connection. We've in our next slide. Hannibal and Malcolm pulled together some great examples of how this has been leveraged in the past, as now we can look at thought starters and inspire us for the future. And then also creating moments of calm in the storm. I love this metaphor because what we can do is we can acknowledge their reality, right? Acknowledging the force and the stress that they feel, perhaps without overwhelming anxiety for them. Okay?
Okay, can you hear me now, Jess? By chance, can
That's
everyone hear me?
This sounds perfect. We'll let everybody on the line also share in. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for that very clear demonstration of those last few points. I'm just going to add a little bit more color here. If so, I'm going to jump back to that last slide for just a second.
Please.
And so, in the first point about reverse engineering the force paradigm, I just want to shed a little bit of light. Gen Z, this is a generation where 83% of them are likely to volunteer for a cause they care about. 81% donate to social issues they're drawn to. And on an outside stat, even 72% of them plan on becoming entrepreneurs one day. So they are very driven to take action. They just need the proper outlet. So if we show COVID is something that can be overcome, it's not an overwhelming event. It's a challenge that they can take on. And what I'm going to do now is advance. I'm just going to go ahead and advance to the next slide because it sounds like you have some more sound challenges. So,
Okay. Yeah, maybe Malcolm, I'll jump in and cover this slide. Yeah, because we're having some tech issues. So really quickly, these are my favorite slides in this whole report. So what we've done is put together some, and again, these are perhaps even very, very old advertising and pieces of communication that really evoked storytelling in them and metaphor and emotion in here. So these are just really ideas for inspiration and how you can activate these insights. So these are incredibly powerful for us. We've divided these into the theme of the metaphor, the frame that they evoke and play into, and then what are the elements that are working, right? So let's first take a look at these for Gen Z. So you can see here, this is a Burger King ad, right? Where it says the lunch battle is over, right? Or here, this is Flow from Progressive. And again, these are very pithy examples, but again, they're metaphors and talking about the beast of the trail. And the theme that we found and believe that would resonate when we're trying to change behavior and evoke the stories that Gen Z are telling us is being empowered to fight back. So how can we harness that force now to counter the feelings of helplessness that they can feel? How can we metaphorically arm them to start to fight back, right? Through these threats, how can we give them weapons, right, in their arsenal? We believe that there can be very empowering messages, right, where we can show the victory over the virus, and that can overcome apathy or even overcome irrationality that we're seeing with Gen Z, okay? The elements, when we think about the visuals, the words, and the tone, right? If somebody wanted to create communication in this space of empowered to fight back, is visuals around armor, battle, victory, strength, weaponry as well, because this is going to play into that force, right? That force metaphor that is so prominent in Gen Z's mindset. And then the tone, right? Because the tone and how you bring this to life in a story is so important. And the tone should be daring, daringly confident, right? Clearly indicate the actions that have to be taken and then pay that off with the impact as well. And so let's now talk about the theme that we called the barrier defying connection as well. So here, the frame is, we know that the feelings of disconnection, we talked about that at the start of the webinar, arise because of this enforced isolation. So how can we inspire their communication, right? And leverage this and imagery like this. And you can see here in this Diesel ad where the copy says, make love, not walls. And these people are breaking through the walls. And we even see the semiotics here of the heart with this, pink filled smoke coming through, that all of these are visuals that are building up the deep metaphor of connection, right? And how all of this can overcome barriers and can unite us, right, in this cause against all odds. So here are some visuals that we brainstormed as a team that, again, taking from this, the broken walls, or even the physical touch, the idea of colorful versus this dull contrast, right? Links coming together, right? The idea of communication devices as well, connecting us. The tone here, again, it's very confident, a little bit defiant, right? And definitely enthusiastic. And then finally, on the very last part of this, this is my favorite example from Gen Z. And this is the calm in the storm. And we saw that Gen Z, when we looked at their metaphoric measurement as well, is they for what was important for them was a sense of balance. And what we did here is we looked at the metaphors that supported force. And we believe that here we can restore a sense of balance, right? And I love this ad where we see, almost this tsunami, and in the heart of it, all of this, idyllic landscape happening there, and this little it almost seems like this protected island as well. And so here is, how can we focus on those positive moments that are born within the chaos? I love how Malcolm and Hannibal came up with this idea, because what we're doing is we're not ignoring the challenge of COVID-19. You're paying respect to it, right? But here you can see there is a calm that's happening. We can offer, right, uplifting tidbits and definitely help them tackle the anxiety that they feel. If you can remember in some of those verbatims we shared, there is so much, right, physical and emotional impact from the force that they see this is. Because what we can do is create chances, right, for them to give these moments to other people as well. So the visuals for this are quite different, right? This is almost a meditative sort of visuals in language, right? There is a disaster element. We are showing the force in this, but it's dichotomous, right? And it's somehow a little bit more spiritual here. The tone is very different, right? If a brand wants to play into the space that we've identified and calm in the storm, where, it's a little bit gently humorous. It can't be too serious here, right? Because then we're just going to over amplify the force element and have them feel these extreme, very negative, scared reactions as well. But there is the tranquility and the peace and the relaxation here as well. Really quickly, let me talk about boomers now as well. So, and then we're going to have oh, yeah. Is your guys' audio a little bit better? Ooh, it still
sounds... Is it coming through any more clearly?
I do not think
so. Can you hear me okay?
No, it sounds a little bit like an echo. Yep, a lot of people are saying sound is still bad. Okay.
Okay, so it's still just going to be iffy on this side. Okay, no problem.
Okay, awesome. So I'll just wrap this up, and then we've got a lot of really good questions I want to get to. So really quickly, let's talk about boomers. So when we think about social policy and behavior change, right, is how can we turn them from the metaphoric passenger in their journey, right, just kind of sitting by idly hibernating, if you can remember that really rich metaphor, into the driver that's going to discourage their, sort of that passivity that they have, into becoming an active journey frame, which is what we want. Because if we can have them become active in the storytelling, right, we can change their behavior, right, and perhaps start taking heed, right, of all the recommendations that are for this cohort. We also want to place value on the connection piece, right, to others. And then how can this be a motivator, right? Where they can weigh the consequences of the behaviors that they're having. We're going to talk about this more on the next slide as well. And finally, we recommend capitalizing on the perceptions of this monotony that they feel, right? By positioning doing good as the rewarding milestone in the journey. So how can we start putting some really interesting interventions, right, for them that they can reward themselves, because they do have that journey framework. So what this has to do is it can't be all about the light at the very, very end of the tunnel. How can we have interventions up until that final light at the end of the tunnel that can help us change behavior? Now, how can brand communications support this? Is we believe that any campaigns featuring consequential decisions, right, can break this passivity journey frame. And we're going to talk about that in just a slide. And then also, how can we showcase that their actions, right, connect them to others through results? And this is really about their need for connection. It's not about physical connection, right? But how can they be connected to other people because they're that driver in the active journey? And lastly, how can brands support this is, again, celebrating those small wins, right? That are going to ground them in this and make it more bearable for them to be disconnected. Okay, perfect. Oh, we see so many questions coming in. So let's wrap up and talk about examples for boomers, because you guys are asking really interesting thought starters, of which some of these we've talked about as a core team. This is a Volkswagen campaign here. And what we like about this is we have to, as a reader, right, we have to stop and think about this story, right? It's slowing us down. It's portraying a journey metaphor right here as well. The theme here is that the journey is not passive. And we believe the frame that's important is that we can underscore, right, taking that active role, not that passive role in navigating COVID-19 seriously, because their decisions and their behaviors affect the outcome, right? And that there is that a happy resolution for COVID-19 is not something that we can take for granted. It's not this very, esoteric sense of hope, that we do have to do something for that. So the visuals that are important are to the journeys, like we talked about earlier, using roads, using these visuals, that there are consequences to decisions. And the tone is very thought-provoking, right? Very serious and oriented on the actions that will come out of it. Now, I also love right here is this Fiat example. If you guys can see this with the steering wheel of the person holding the steering wheel, and then we have hands holding back. And then there's also one of organ donation here, where you have a patient hugging this transparent person who's donated organs as well. And here, I love this recommendation that Hannibal and Malcolm put together, is that your journey is inherently somehow connected to another person. Again, this is leveraging and building up these two most prominent deep metaphors of journey and connection to make it that much more efficacious in its story. So here we believe that demonstrating, right, that if you're responsible, right, you have the direct positive impact on others, right, even if you can't directly witness the impact here. And then we believe that this strategy, or this frame of the message, right, has this incentivization degree, because what you're doing is you're incentivizing people on their unconscious need for connection. And I really want to underscore this, that connection is not just about physical connection. It's also about your more unconscious sense of connection. There's also the visuals, right? There's the physical touch. There's the relationships. It's about the groups of the people here as well. And the tone here is the sentiment, the hopeful, it's a little bit of active, but there is sort of a sadness to this as well, right? We can see it and we can feel it here in the tone. And that there's a ripple effect, right? That we see, that there's the positive deed that impacts someone else, right? Or you could also the consequences of a negative one too. And that's a different strategy we can talk about. And then finally, how we can celebrate the small wins here. And I do want to go through this quickly to get at the comments. And I love that this team, everyone on this webinar, is talking amongst each other, because these insights are so important for COVID-19. So when we celebrate the small wins, how we can incorporate storytelling, right? That turns each day into the micro journeys, like we talked about, right? That ultimately can have that light at the end of the tunnel, right? That has that happy ending. But that can help us break up the monotony that we're all, I think, facing with this quarantine, and that we have a path to something tangible, right? The path to progress. So here again, the visuals, our journey, the roads, the decisions, the consequences, right, that we have with that. But the tone can be a little bit more cheery and fun and inspiring. All right, let's jump in now and look at some of these questions. Let's see. I'm going to just go to one. And yes, this recording of the webinar is going to be available for everyone. And then if everyone wants to also, please pay attention. We're going to have the follow-up in the next couple of weeks with, we're going to be pulsing boomers and Gen Z as well. And we also had a question I saw earlier as well, is why didn't we talk to millennials? And that is a very easy answer, because we were really, really intrigued with, why are people acting irrationally when it came to COVID-19, right? With social distancing or all of these, even hoarding food as well. And you're seeing, people standing in line. And then when it came down to it, a lot of research has been done on millennials and how millennials are, and Gen Z and Gen X and millennials are more likely to listen to social distancing guidelines, and all of, they are actually quarantining inside their house. If their state at the time had a shelter in place order, they were doing that. And so that's why we specifically focused on boomers and Gen Zs. Okay, I'm going to go here is, do you have any insights on the messaging moving people to make online donations to a cause they connect with? Yes, on our next webinar, we will be talking about this, and we're working with someone exactly on this issue, right? And how we can change and put effective storytelling into behavior change so people are donating online as well. So very shortly, and it's something I was working on this all weekend. We're going to have some recommendations, some really exciting stuff. So we're going to be sharing that out in the next week or two as well. Let's see, Nancy here said, did you have any questions about behaviors? Did the respondents feel they were ignoring social distancing? We did, interesting, Nancy, we do have some behaviors as well. On our next webinar, we're going to be sharing that out to see how it's changing over time as well. But just for the sake of today, we didn't include those. But in our next iteration of this work, because it is ongoing, we will share that out as well. I'm just going through as well. Let's find some. And then we'll also take note of all of these and perhaps answer some of these questions in an upcoming Medium article that we'll share out as well, because these are so fascinating. One question is, I'd be interested to know if there are any thoughts on how boomers will react once everything settles. Will they immediately be seeking touch, activities, travel, or will they be hesitant? That's a good call. That's a good question. And that makes me think that they're actively almost right now looking at the end of this journey. So I wonder and hypothesize by the metaphors they're using, if you're coming out of hibernation, to go back to that, there might be a slow period where they're almost, stretching their muscles a little bit, if we go with that metaphor. But I wonder if they'll jump right back into their behaviors that they once had based on the metaphors we saw, because there is a lot of hope and optimism with boomers as well. Let's see. What are the implications for brands that offer joy? Can that fit into the theme of calm in the storm, or does that feel tone deaf? I think that the tone of that has to be careful, that you would have to be careful and think about what is the right kind of joy that we should be having. Is it a joy that could perhaps connect people I think that that would be really, really important as well. Okay, let me scroll down a little bit as well. There's so many good questions here. How do you anticipate these current behaviors will imply different behaviors when things go back to a new normal? Diana, I think that this is such a good question. And I think we're going to have to be able to answer that more effectively when we do the second pulse, and we're going to be launching the same study again next week. And then I want to start seeing how these metaphors change, and then what that means for the future. If we start seeing force amplified and we see, like 4 more points on force for Gen Z, then I think we're going to start thinking about what does that mean for behavior change in the future, or things getting, almost back to normal for them. Because that's going to undercut the severity of it. Let me jump to another question. A lot of politicians and government spokespeople are using a container metaphor. Yes, they are, by saying we're all in this together. Yes, that is a container metaphor when they're messaging about COVID-19. Did your research show anything saying using a container metaphor is misguided? This is a really, really brilliant question. Let me jump forward because we do container is a metaphor that we test for. So here you can see container by a few points, right, is elicited is more important for boomers than Gen Z. But interestingly, it is the 4th most prominent deep metaphor. So Chris, to answer your question, I don't know if it's misguided. Is it most effective? Maybe not, right? I would say if you could pair container with connection, journey, or force, it would be that much more effective because of that. I hope that answers your question. And I know we're running out of time, and thank you guys for continuing to answer these. How important do you think control in the post-COVID era is, especially for financial sector, financial services sectors? Here again, this is, I'm glad that we have this slide up on the screen, because here you can see control kind of sitting in the middle here, a little bit at parity. Gen Z and boomers are equal on the sense of feeling out of control right now. Not the most salient deep metaphor for them. And do I think it's going to be important? Yes, but not as important as the other metaphors as well, of needing a sense of connection, and then, wanting this force feeling for Gen Z to ultimately go away as well. And I know we're at time right now. So what we're going to do is do a little bit of a content analysis of these questions, and then post a follow-up on our Medium page. And there's still good dialogue going through here now. So I would love to see everyone back in another week or two, as we're anticipating sharing out the next round of this research to see how the metaphors are changing, and continuing the discussion with you all. So thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, guys. Bye.